Good morning, everyone. We're just going to let attendees trickle in here and then we will get started. Happy Friday. Happy almost weekend. Okay, I know we've got a lot to get through, so why don't we just go ahead and get started? Since we're going to be doing some intro stuff anyway, we can just get through that quickly.
That sounds great. Let me put this phone to rest. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back, or welcome in the first place. So reminder, these webinars are really informal, meant to be a safe place to sort of think and feel and say just about anything. We'll cut to Sonia in a second for some details on how to enter the conversation, but we have a special guest today, Heather Isaacs, who's our chaplain. We work together here at Mettle Health, and we'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself. But I'm very, very excited that Heather's with us today because we're going to dig deep into hospice, which I think a lot of us know something about, but there's just so much misunderstanding around hospice, what it is and what it isn't. So we're going to go there today. But before we do that, let's see. Well, Heather, why don't you just jump on in before we cut over to Sonia?
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to be here too today. Hospice has been a huge part of my life for a long time. I was a hospice chaplain for 16 years. I am based in California. I had the opportunity to be a part of two nonprofit community hospices over those 16 years, both just parts of my heart. I really was able to form some of the most important work relationships, mentoring relationships, friendships from those years. And I really love the vision and the mission of hospice. I consider it one of my greatest teachers. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk about what that's meant and what I've learned. And I also want to say that I don't think hospice is for everybody. And I want to name that too, because I really can honor, this is complicated and there are a lot of things that are outside of our control when we're even anticipating what might happen in our own deaths or in the dying process of those we love. And from my own personal experience, my dad had an ICU death. And from a hospice perspective, he was probably what they would say appropriate for hospice in the last 6 months to a year of his life, but it would not have aligned with what he wanted for himself in his care, in his treatment. And so even though it was a hard journey, I really honor that for him, that the treatment path that he took aligned with who he was. And so I really don't, as much as I love hospice, I don't want to put it up on a pedestal in this conversation, is that it's the only way or the best way. Yeah. And I think a lot of us who work in hospice know that people often will come on to hospice learning about it really late in their illness or misunderstanding what the services are about. They think it's only for the very, very, very end of life and don't know like all of the support that's there for what could be even months before a person actually dies. So however that conversation unfolds today, I'm just really excited to be here with you all.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you, Heather, for that personal background too. It helps because this isn't just a professional pursuit. And I'm so glad you said that about hospice not being right for everybody. And there's a timing issue too. And anyway, we'll dig into all that good stuff. So thank you for joining us, Heather. And I'm with you. Like I think a lot of us in the field of palliative care fell in love first with hospice, and that's why we got into this work. That's true of me to some degree too. Okay. All right, guys. Sones, over to you.
Thank you. All right, so Heather and BJ, we're going to try to get through a lot of details about hospice before we get to your questions. So once we're through that, there's two ways that you can ask Heather or BJ a question, or both of them. You can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can speak with them directly. Or if you prefer not to do that, you can type your question into the Q&A and I will read it aloud for you. So again, two ways: raise your hand, ask it out loud, or type it into the Q&A and I will read it for you. And we're super excited about this one. I hope there'll be lots of questions that we can answer because there's so much nuance. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and can I just offer real quick? Sorry, I was wondering too, if people want to put into the chat what their experience of hospice has been.
Yes, thank you, Heather. Yes.
Yeah, it could be just a word or a phrase or short sentence of just what it might conjure up for you from just what you've learned personally or from others. That would be great too, to maybe help us shape the conversation.
That's a beautiful idea. Right on.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Yeah. All right, Heather, you ready? Shall we jump into the meat? Yeah. Well, guys, so the basics. I mean, you got your bullet points here, but let's ground ourselves in the basics. Heather, you want to we're going to tag team these a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, well, the team dynamics are such a key piece of this work.
Absolutely. There's a sense that, you know, when hospice was first formed, this is meant to be a holistic, comprehensive way of addressing what Dame Cicely Saunders called total pain, that our whole being is affected at end of life. And so we need the medical perspective, we need the practical care, we need emotional support, we need spiritual support, all of it. So we have team members that really reflect everything from our own journey as a patient to a family member who will need bereavement support. It's all included.
And that's so one of the things I love about that when we entered the field was because it implies something really, really important, that no one person or no one discipline has a lock on what it means to suffer, what joy means, how to get there. So I love the implications of it, of there being a team. And by the way, guys, for a hospice to be certified as a hospice per se, you have to have these team members. It's not an option. So yeah, another big thing is most 70% of care, I think is right, Heather, 70% of care is meted out in a person's home. As a service, it was designed primarily to get, people said they wanted to die at home. So the service was designed to get to people in their home. And it has made home deaths possible. We've got a long way to go to meet what people want. The numbers a lot of us die in places we don't wish to. But the idea here too is like home, it can be flexible. Some hospices will serve people if they call their car home, or homeless folks who are staying in a camp or under a bridge. So it's home care, but you get to say to some degree, depending on the agency, where is home? So yeah, anything else there, Heather, on this slide you want to touch on?
No, I mean, I really love that. I mean, it's meant to be accessed by everyone who needs it. And that sense of what home is it can be complicated, it can be dynamic. And sometimes it can be even, uncertain, but we will try to really show up where we can. Yeah.
And that includes nursing home, guys, by the way. A lot of folks who find their way to a nursing home or assisted living, that's your home, and therefore you would qualify for home hospice in the nursing home, for example. And there are other things too, right, guys? I mean, so there's equipment, beds, bedside commodes, all sorts of gear that is paid for. And medications are managed through the hospice, which is itself a godsend and often delivered to the home. And we'll talk through the enrollment process. Is now a good time to talk about the enrollment process, Heather, or should we move forward a little bit?
Yeah, and I also I just saw one comment come through in the chat about someone describing both the stellar and the miserable experience they've had as a hospice caregiver, and sort of the challenges around, we will go, hospice is there to be there for you in your home. And one of the limitations though is it's not 24-hour care. And so we don't have those kinds of structures in place. So a lot of times people will have an anticipated expectation that hospice is going to be there around the clock. And that is not the structure of hospice. And so there can be a real gap there too. And how do we help people die at home and get the care they need, sometimes for extended amount of times? And we know it's expensive and hard. So that's definitely one of those areas that can be a challenge. So yeah, the enrollment process.
Mm-hmm. Well, should we cut into that now? Let's see here. Well, this might be a nice leaping off point, huh, Heather? Like, to qualify for hospice. Help us understand who qualifies for hospice.
In conversation with your doctors, if you have a life-limiting illness, a terminal illness that is understood to sort of give you about 6 months or less to live, then you would qualify for hospice. But that's a sort of a hard thing. There's not like a scientific way to know that. So that's just sort of the rubric. As my understanding is, BJ, when hospice first started, so many of the diagnoses that were utilizing hospice were cancer related. Mm-hmm. And those often were people coming in with 6 months or less to live. And more recently, in the last 10 years or so, that's changing considerably around the increase in dementia care. Mm-hmm. And that's a much more, it could be a much more long-term kind of situation. Yeah. So that 6 months, though, is the technical requirement for accessing hospice under Medicare.
And we should note here, right? I mean, and you guys will have heard us talk about this in other settings, but we're pretty bad at prognosticating. So, there is no, it's squishy. When are you at the 6 months or less to live mark is a hard call. And sometimes or often we're wrong. Very often, people tend to wait very late into their life to elect hospice. So that there's more pressure to get hospice into the mix earlier, but there's such a thing as hospice too soon. And so this idea of prognosticating, there's a little bit of wiggle room. And it's also, we should say that the person, you're likely to die within 6 months if nature's left to take its course. So it's sort of an average notion. But again, our bodies don't always behave that way. And it's possible, therefore, to re-up in hospice. Sometimes people can go for another 3 months, another 6 months. Sometimes people are on hospice for over a year. You just have to show some decline. You have to prove in some sense that you're actually dying. So we can talk a little bit more about that later too. But should we cut back, Heather, to say a little bit more about the enrollment process, or should we kick it forward?
What do you think? Yeah, I think we can move forward. I mean, I think the enrollment process, as I understand it, you have to have is it 2 doctors or 1 doctor?
Yeah, 2 doctors.
Two doctors to sign off, and it's a conversation with your doctors, your medical team. And also the big part of that too is then choosing comfort care, choosing to because even in my dad's situation, he had 6 months or less to live, but he chose treatment. And so that's a big part of that too, is how do you want to really focus your care towards, quality of life, comfort, being at home as much as possible, not in the hospital. So those are also parts of those conversations.
Yeah. And very often back to the sort of logistics of the enrollment process, it's 2 doctors. Yes. One of whom is usually the medical director of the hospice. So you as the patient don't need to go searching for 2 doctors. Your doctor, primary care, or your oncologist, or whoever is really most directing your care can be one of them. And the hospice medical director is usually the second doctor to okay the enrollment. But you're bringing up this sort of question around the treatment idea too. So it's 6 months or less to live, and you have to forego any more efforts to push back on your disease per se. So if I'm enrolling in hospice for cancer, for me to proceed with hospice, I have to stop trying to treat the cancer. And normally traditionally that's sort of a non-issue, because by then there really isn't much more to try. Generally, often is sort of the idea. So it's not such a tortured decision, but that's gotten a little bit more murky. We have more and more treatments that are treating the cancer, but in a sort of a palliative mode. They're not intended to treat the cancer, but they might slow it down. So it gets really tricky. So the 6 months or less to live piece of the crossroad is tricky. And this giving up of curative intended care is also tricky. And there I just use the phrase giving up. And this is something we'll talk about later today, about the sort of the part of the barriers are kind of psychological. If it feels like giving up, well, who wants to give up? That's not so. Anyway, okay, well, we'll keep moving here. So the team, tell us about the team, Heather. You know this well.
Yeah, the team comprises of even more than what's on this list sometimes, depending on the agency, between the medical doctor, nurse, social worker, chaplain, home health aide, volunteers, grief counselor, PT, OT. I've seen some really robust music therapy programs being included as part of the team. Some interesting, alternative therapies, depending on where you're at. And each of these disciplines you may have encountered in a different setting, but from a hospice perspective, is really kind of specializing in learning about you and what is important to you, how to honor, your home, your kind of care circle, your beliefs, your needs in a very kind of personalized way, around your comfort, around your, if you have concerns, if you have practical issues around, finishing business before death, excuse me, if you have, fears, anxieties, anything that might just be in that realm of emotional pain, grief, spiritual pain, we have people there to support that. And then the volunteers, I really always want to uplift the volunteers in any hospice program, because really hospice in its foundation was it was a grassroots volunteer movement to try to bring death care back into our own kind of our own power, our own lives, our own homes. And so volunteers are really an integral part, and they can be anywhere from helping with patient respite in the home, to being a friendly visitor. There's a lot of sometimes things they're doing in the background they may never see out in the community, but they are just so instrumental. And grief counselors, we have oftentimes grief counselors. I believe the Medicare benefit allows for 13 months of grief support after the death of your loved one. And many community hospices will also offer community support to its members, regardless of whether or not you've had a death in your life connected to that hospice. So it can be an amazing resource for grief. I myself am a chaplain, and we are trained. I saw a note from Sarah about some of the her own experiences with that. And it is a live issue, I think, for my field. But the kind of chaplain that I aspire to be is somebody who can really walk with people and support them according to their own beliefs, their traditions, cultural, religious, spiritual, ethical, needs. And I don't have any agenda in that. So really, that's what a chaplain is there for. To be a sounding board around some of those deeply interior processes that we go through often at the end of life. Social workers are there for a lot of practical support, emotional support. They will help you with your FMLA paperwork, to helping with family conferences. They are really instrumental. And then your nurse case manager is somebody who will be one of your primary contacts. They're going to be the person who's really navigating for you and with you, care between your doctor and the durable medical equipment. And then the home health aide, the hospice aides to me are sometimes the one discipline on the team that may be overlooked as like how instrumental they are. In my experience, the hospice aides are often the first member on the team who can really build trust with a patient and family, because they're really coming into a deeply intimate space to help with, daily activities and physical care and hygiene. And in that space, they preserve dignity, they are compassionate, kind, and they are often, I think, sometimes the first person on the team who really can build trust. And I really value that on the team. And then, of course, our doctors who help to kind of make sure that, medications and everything that are needed are being, managed appropriately. Does that kind of cover?
Yeah, it does so beautifully, Heather. Thank you. And like you're saying, there's some of the team gets even bigger, like you're saying, art therapy and music thanatology in particular are just can be stunning.
Yes.
Stunning piece of the work. And also, like you're saying earlier, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit here this morning, Heather. Thank you for bearing with me. But I glossed over it, but it's such a key point. Even with all this team here in the background, it is very often in the background, to your point earlier, like, on the receiving end at your home, you may see the home health aide most days, maybe an hour to an hour and a half. But, for most days, and then maybe a couple times a week or 3 times a week, the nurse is coming out, and social worker maybe early on and then as needed. And so it's not like you're seeing these people every day, all day. Quite not really at all. They're there when you need them. And the hospice is a 24-hour hotline to call into in the middle of the night. You're not calling 911, you're calling the hospice when things go wrong, and they're supposed to be able to talk you through things or send someone to the house if need be. It doesn't always play out that way. So I've heard a lot about staffing shortages, and so there's sort of the aspiration of how the team works, and there's the reality of the team works. But one way or another is that families need to appreciate that they're still going to be at home without someone from the hospice in the room, 22 hours of the day, most days. And so a lot of the work of the team sometimes is teaching the family how to do some of these things. But also segues. So I'm so with you. The home health aide is sort of the least heralded, least appreciated member of the team, and perhaps in some ways the most important. They tend to be the ones there most often actually touching you, being with you.
Yeah.
And so I can't overstate the poignancy and the importance of that work. And it's a kind of like so many things in our system, sort of the positions of least respect in so many ways are some of the most important positions.
Absolutely.
Least trained and least training, least support.
Least compensated. Yeah.
Least compensated. Exactly. So we can talk about, we can editorialize along the way here too, but know, guys, that there's a huge team. You just may not see them all the time, but they're back there. And ask, can you see your chaplain? Can you see your social worker? It reminds me, I'm sorry, we'll move off here in a sec, but I'm so curious, Heather, in your experience, how often do you need to explain your role as chaplain? I know it's a little tangent.
Oh, no, it's okay. I would say all the time, and I totally understand why, because I don't take that personally at all, that there might be plenty of good reasons to have questions about what the chaplain does and what do they believe, and will they honor my family and who I am, and can I have a chaplain if I'm not religious? Yes. Really, we're talking about things that, spirituality encompasses so much, and yet we don't have great language or I think even understanding sometimes within ourselves that the things that I might actually hold most dear to myself might actually be part of how I'm constructing meaning. And I might not think of myself as spiritual, and that's okay. And yet I'm still having deep contemplations about why am I here and what are my relationships what do they mean? How can I improve them? How can I, my values, all those things, what happens after we die, this like incredible mystery that I have to step into, all of that, yeah, I would say is under the umbrella of like the spiritual and existential life. And I have to explain my role, and a lot of times as a help, I think, to bridge some of that distance. And I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. I think a lot of us see chaplain, we think religion, oh, I'm not religious, therefore I don't want to talk to chaplain. No, you are missing out. And you are trained, right? Chaplains are trained, you're not there to proselytize any particular route.
No. And I mean, this goes into some of the things that maybe I don't want to speak for all chaplains, but my own ethic in this is, I think, shared by, I would say, many or most of my colleagues, is that that would be a kind of a spiritual violation, ethical, malpractice of what we do to proselytize or to try to convince somebody of something. One of the things I would say about how hospice has been a teacher for me in my life, I know it's maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I think it really also connects to the larger vision of hospice, is that I have really come to believe wholeheartedly that each person contains wisdom in their own life and death, and that I don't have to understand or even have had a similar experience, and yet I can still support it. And the team is there to do that. And so really trusting each person with their own journey, to me, is really core to what this support system is designed to be for. That makes sense.
Sure does. And I appreciate, thanks for bearing with the tangent. I think it's really, really an important piece of this puzzle, and another one that's just not well understood. So anyway, amen. Thank you. Okay, gosh.
On that quick note, sorry to interrupt you guys. Does it make any sense for us to just very, very quickly go through, like, this is what the doctor does in this moment, this is what the nurse does in this moment, social worker? I just know when I started working at hospice, I didn't know what most of these positions were.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, and it also kind of varies from team to team and hospice agency to hospice agency.
Right. But in
general, for one thing is you're probably not going to see the doctor much, and especially these days with staffing issues. And there's a lot to say about that fact. You really should see that it's meant to be part of the model, is access to the doctor. Very often, though, the doctor is in the background writing prescriptions and okaying things, et cetera. And their job is really to oversee the medical piece. And the way healthcare is wired, it is also sort of presumed the de facto leader of the team. But in reality, the way it plays out is very often the doctor doesn't know as much as the nurse or the social worker or the chaplain or other people who are at the bedside a lot. So the doctor's got to oversee a zillion patients. So you may see pretty little of your doctor. That can vary. Nurse is probably the one you're going to feel like who's probably the quarterback of the team, generally speaking. Heather, do you think otherwise, or is that your experience too?
Actually, I'm sorry. I was looking at the chat. I was getting
sure,
I was realizing there's some deep reflections and some painful experiences people have been having. So I'm sorry, I got a little bit.
Well, that's okay. No, I don't mean to put you on the spot either. So no, I was just saying that I think practically speaking, on the receiving end, you'll most likely feel that the nurse is very often sort of the team leader and the quarterback of your care.
Yes. And I was just reading a note talking about how somebody had only seen their nurse like maybe once every 10 days for an hour to check and refill meds and do vital signs. And I'm getting a sense from some of the chat that I know that there is a spectrum of what is possible in your experience of hospice, from some of the most transcendent and supportive to some of the most alienating and frustrating. I mean, so I want to really hold that too, that we're talking about something that might also be in the ideal and that I advocate for, and I also understand is not always the truth.
Right on. Amen. Well, guys, should we spend a little bit more time here, or should we kind of keep moving given all the comments and stuff we want to get to?
Yeah, let's keep moving. Could we just do a quick shout out for what the social worker does?
Oh, yeah. Well, Heather, I think you said already, but social worker has in some ways the widest purview. I mean, they're dealing with all sorts of emotional issues that might feel psychotherapeutic to very practical and logistical issues, linking you to, as Heather said earlier, to FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act kind of paperwork and how do you qualify for getting out of work, et cetera, as a family member. So everything from logistics and paperworky stuff to big time sort of psychotherapeutic and family dynamics and what can feel like therapy. So social worker is a big part of the team, and has his or her fingers in many different pies. Anything more to add there for now, Heather?
No, I would say, yeah, that they really can be such a resource for the emotional and also the practical.
Right on. And they also tend to have a good view of allied services in the neighborhood, in the area. And so forth.
Yeah.
So
And they can help caregivers to try to find, more support resources. When you are a family caregiver, a loved one doing this, finding that extra care in the gap, they can help with that too.
Yeah, and right on. And the home health aid that the hospice will provide is wonderful. Like we're saying, generally speaking, it's a really powerful, important role. And very often, not infrequently, families may want to supplement and have something more approaching around the clock aids at home, or maybe half the day or whatever, more than an hour and a half. So very often, if you're looking for home health aides in your neighborhood that can come in too, that would be an out-of-pocket cost to you. Although, by the way, all of these things are covered by the hospice benefit. There should not be any out-of-pocket cost for what we've been talking about, but so far. But you may want to supplement, like with extra home health aides. And very often, the social worker will have her finger on. Will have a list of folks who do this work in your neighborhood. Okay, I'm gonna move us along, guys. There's so much. Okay, here we go.
And on this particular slide, we've had a couple questions come in, so I figured I'll just read them now, and that can kind of give context to this slide. Does that sound okay? Okay, great. So one of the questions that came in was, a friend of mine is having a hard time with the fact that he has to, quote unquote, give up his own doctor to participate in hospice. And then very related to that is the question of, what is then the relationship between the hospice doctor and like your primary care doctor or your oncologist?
Yeah, so technically this is, technically any doctor can be your primary doctor into hospice. So like if you have a family practice doc or your GI doc or your cardiologist or whoever you're most connected to in your healthcare, that physician, legally in the sort of structure of healthcare, can follow you into hospice and be your primary doctor in hospice. Very often that's not a practical route because they may not really be well trained at the issues that come up at the end of life, or may not have the bandwidth to be writing all the orders and things that have to happen to be the primary doc in hospice. So very often, very often the hospice medical director will become the primary doctor in charge of your care. And you can name your other physicians as consultants, and the hospice will keep them abreast of changes in the care plan, et cetera. So that's what's supposed to be possible. Again, a lot of doctors just don't have the bandwidth or the training to even offer to follow you to hospice. And again, underneath everything Heather and I and Sonia are saying here, there's also ever present a critique of how things actually play out in the healthcare world, which can be quite divergent from the way it's supposed to be or was designed to be. So yeah, I'm surprised to hear, well, I wish the answer to the person's comment, there would be no structural reason why your doctor couldn't follow you into hospice, but there could be practical barriers that make it kind of impossible. Was there another angle to the comment, Sonia? I forgot already.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's just the concept of giving up, which I've heard from other people too, that they went on to hospice and then their primary doctor, quote unquote, dropped them, which can feel really icky because now you're moving to this group of people that you don't know, but it's such a normal thing for that primary doctor to then hand over the care to the hospice doctor and let them handle it. So there definitely are doctors, in my experience, who do keep up with all the orders and sign off on everything, but it's pretty rare that that happens. So just an understanding that I think for most people's primary or oncologist or whatever doctor was referring you into this, it's easier on them just, for administration and life to let the hospice doctor take over.
That is true, and it also comments on the load that
Right, exactly. Yeah.
People are seeing. It's not a lack of caring generally, but
Exactly.
we are clunky as hell with communication, and even if there's a real handoff and that doctor is really not going to be involved in your care anymore, of course we'd like to say there should be a good conversation about that, and you should be prepared for that, and there should be opportunities to say goodbye. And sadly, it doesn't always play out that way. And then you got to deal with all the emotional load of moving into this final phase of life, plus perhaps feelings of abandonment and missing your old doctor. And that's not an uncommon story. I would say, as ever in healthcare, one of the things that all of us can do as patients and family members is ask, say, can you, I understand that it may not make sense for you to be the primary doctor in my care, mom's care, whatever else, but would you be okay if being a consulting physician, if they kept you in the mix, if we kept you in the loop? There is this second station where there's a consulting physician who can be in the loop but not responsible for the care. So you can ask for that, ask the doctor for that. And if they can't do that, then they should be able to at least tell you that, and then you know what you're getting. So as ever, part of the response to this sort of herky-jerky system is communication and advocacy, like your own advocacy, you advocating for yourself and asking questions. Heather, anything more you want to add to that mix?
No, I would say that actually might speak to this deeper feeling I'm having about this conversation and seeing some of these questions coming through, is that I really want these kinds of conversations to empower people to know what is theirs to ask for and expect. And that oftentimes when patients and families are coming into a hospice situation, they're doing so at a really time of crisis. They're exhausted, they're raw, they're just depleted, and this is overwhelming. And the idea of having this kind of conversation, in that moment is overwhelming. So I think whatever we can do to extend some of those reflections and learning sooner, I'm hoping will give people a chance to know like what they can expect from good hospice care.
Yeah.
And then also how to ask for what you need in the transitions between, when you are leaving, curative care, but you may have had a whole oncology team that is part of your heart. Those are relationships that need to be honored and cared for as well as part of the entire journey.
For everyone's sake, including those doctors,
yes.
chaplains and everybody involved. Right on. Okay. Excuse me. And I would say another comment, Sones, you kind of referenced this. You did reference this. Given all these sort of this handoff and this feeling of, potential feelings of abandonment and just confusion, sadly can also play into some of the sort of the implications around hospices, this thing that you're giving up, like you're no longer relevant to your doctor because you've given up and you got to go over there now. It's this feeling like, so we can't say it enough, but we should probably find more examples or moments in this talk to say it. Like, hospice is not giving up, yielding to what is and what is going to be, no matter what you do about it. That is can be considered a strength. That's not a weakness. That is not you quitting, etc. I apologize on behalf of all our medical language because our language suggests that you are giving up treatment. I even said it earlier in this talk. So I just want to name that because it's also part of why this can feel so hard, unnecessarily hard. When, as Heather and I are saying here, this should be, in so many ways, it's good news. There should be should be a sense of relief entering into hospice. So anything more to add here, guys, or shall we move forward?
BJ, I'm curious, would you say then that palliative care, part of the extension of palliative care beyond hospice, can sometimes be a bridge in this space too?
Oh, yes,
That, that palliative
yes.
care, I think even maybe, I'm wondering if this might be a space to mention why palliative care might have a role to play
Yep.
separate from hospice,
Yeah.
if you might speak to that.
Such a good, thank you, Heather. Right. So as you guys know, we talked here. So palliative care and hospice are one in the same field. The field is called hospice and palliative medicine. But palliative medicine, hospice in a way came first. Palliative medicine, this sort of bigger, younger cousin, grew up around hospice expressly because of this 6 months or less to live thing, and you have to give up curative intention and all this stuff. So palliative care took the same philosophy of tending to your subjective sense, your quality of life, your family life, and sort of moved beyond the structures of hospice. So you can get palliative care for years, anywhere along the course of your journey, as you guys know by now. So having given all these sort of transitions, and these transitions in care is where so much of the trouble creeps in. If you've got a palliative care team involved already before the hospice moment, you know, you're pushing on your cancer, you're treating that heart failure, whatever it is, you're even aggressively involved in healthcare and intervening wherever you can. Palliative care is a great adjunct to that mix, tending to your symptoms along the way, et cetera. So if palliative care is in the mix, by rights, you should count on them being a team of continuity. They can hold space as you move from one sort of system of care to another, one philosophy of care to another. And so if you have a palliative care team involved, lean on them heavily to communicate across these gaps. And your palliative care doctor is a really good candidate to continue on as your doctor into hospice, because of the linkage between the fields of hospice and palliative medicine. They are well trained and suited to be your primary physician in hospice, generally speaking. So they, in their person and in their philosophy and their spirit, can be this piece of continuity across these divides. Heather, anything more you want to add to that? That's a really important prompt here.
No, I actually, that's something that I think I'm just really glad you could talk to that, because I think that's one of the ways in which I'm seeing some of those like gaps sort of now being bridged. It's still, I think, pretty early on that we've still not figured out how to maybe compensate with, you know, insurance and all of that, these palliative care programs. But it's definitely, I think, taking greater, you know, route now, and that's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, honestly, of all the ways you might define palliative care, one good way is it's transitional care. It's really good at holding spaces in between structural elements. And so it is really good at navigating transitions in all sorts of ways. So, okay. All right. I'm going to keep us moving here, or try to keep us moving. Yeah, to treat or not to treat. Heather, anywhere you want to jump in there, or you want me to take that?
Maybe I'm curious, maybe what you might say to that.
Well, like we've, you know, this is another moment to think about. For one, is to sort of loosen the languaging that you'll hear around this,
Yeah.
sort of giving up and et cetera. And, you know, Heather, you and I have probably seen zillions of families of patients who will keep treating their disease because they don't want to disappoint their doctor, or they don't want their family to think that they're giving up, or other sort of for other indirect reasons. And it can be very sad, because oftentimes that means people actually actively hurting themselves by taking treatments that take up their precious energy and aren't really expected to help in the long run. And you can enter into these charades. It happens not infrequently. Here again is to push past some of those fears and really try to communicate, asking your doctor, what will this treatment do again? Why are we doing this? What happens if I don't do this treatment, doc? You know, what are my options there? This is a moment to begs for communication. We'd all like to think that our doctor has our best interest in heart and knows us so well and would never offer treatment if that doesn't help us. Well, truth is that doctor probably is seeing 30 or 40 other people that day and can't these days just can't hold all that knowledge, knowing you so well what you would want, what you wouldn't want. So this is a moment, this is why advanced directives can be very important. This is a moment for you as patient and family member to advocate and be sure to ask questions and not assume things of your doctor. You can generally assume good intentions, but this is a very subjective decision. You know, like to your dad's situation, I won't pretend to comment on it, but it sounds like treating was very, very important to him, with his eyes wide open. Like, you know, that was what he actually wanted. He wasn't just tripping down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I do love the clock picture. That is, I think, someone said they want one of the clocks. I think I might too. But that really, we're looking at what's the deeper meaning, the deeper feeling in the decisions we make about our care and our treatment. What are the beliefs that we hold about that? Is there a sense that if I am not, actively seeking treatment, then I'm somehow like dishonoring this life or this body, or that, God would want me to like do everything possible, or my family, I'll be, whatever those beliefs might be, like how to hold space for that and honor that it touches into the deepest parts of our being to make these kinds of decisions. And I tend to be the person to say, I don't think there is an absolute right or wrong in this. We are all doing the best we can with the information we have day by day. And so I always want to just extend so much compassion and grace for this like decision making that can really weigh so heavily on people's hearts.
That's such a beautiful note. And it's not just an analytical process of weighing the pros and cons. There's much more to it, as you and this clock point us to. Just like every other major decision in human existence, we're complicated animals.
It's curious to me, though. I think it's interesting that, also the idea, though, of hospice, people will have that if I go on to hospice, then tomorrow I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And there's actually interesting research to show that sometimes when people move to comfort care, they can actually live longer than what they would have perhaps had if they had continued to pursue treatment. So there's also kind of like maybe a paradox, or that hospice doesn't always mean the thing you think it's going to mean. It might not be the best way to communicate that, but it's interesting to me that sometimes people actually might improve their kind of amount of energy and quality of life. They can be at home and not taking, chemotherapy and just feeling miserable. So that's important too. It's not always a clear either or.
In fact, it often isn't. And thank you for that note too, Heather. You're right on. And there are more and more data around this. I mean, when I was trained in 2005, or excuse me, whatever it was, it was really supposed that, yeah, you can kind of either go for quality of life or quantity of life. Like you kind of can't have both. And that decision to treat or not to treat kind of fell into there somewhere. But that turns out that's just not true. It's not that clear cut. And it makes sense too, if you de-stress a person, surround them with love, listen to them, help them feel as well as possible, that's de-stressing them. And then that may be the mechanism by which we can live longer in this mode of care. So yeah, thank you for helping us chew on that one too, Heather. All right, I'm gonna keep moving. We've got 5 more slides to go, and I bet a lot of questions. So yeah, can you walk us through this one? This is another one of those moments to kind of clarify that a lot of people feel like if they go into hospice, like that's it. It's like they just sign their death warrant and they're just, so.
That is heavy, yeah, and not true. But it's really important to clarify from, under the Medicare benefit, a person's, again, like they're appropriate. I don't actually like that word, but whether or not they're appropriate, I prefer to be inappropriate usually. So,
Me too.
but that idea that what qualifies for hospice is an ongoing conversation and a reevaluation with your hospice doctor and hospice team. And so if over time you're actually stabilizing in your prognosis, then you may be reevaluated and then discharged from hospice. That's on the hospice side of things, that they can say, hey, actually, you're stabilized. You don't really meet the hospice criteria, but if down the road things change, let us know. The hard part about this is that people often are not actually getting better. They may not be like radically better. They're still living with profound need for care and support. And but it doesn't technically meet the hospice requirement. So that discharge can put people into a really uncomfortable gap again in care. And revocation, that is your choice, as I understand it. If you say, this is actually, I want to go back I found out about a new trial, or I want to like reconsider this treatment, or you can revoke hospice and return to, you can go seek treatment at any time. It's not like once you sign on to hospice, then you're kind of like never able to change your mind. Anything you might want to say about discharge revocation that I'm...
Well,
can I add something?
Yeah.
I was just going to say I totally, Heather, that nod about discharge and like having the family be used to the care and then all of a sudden they're cut off from it feels really difficult for the family, for the caregiver, for the team. I think it can be really hard. So that's an important point. But also just wanted to make sure to say, after discharge and revocation, you can come back onto hospice as well. So it's the same process as going on. You've revoked or you've been discharged, you come back. And many times after people are discharged, they will come back onto hospice. And it also happens that people who are discharged then die not on hospice. That also happens. So I don't want to make it sound like it's always that it's always caught again. Sometimes they're determined to not be appropriate for hospice and they die 2 weeks later, which means they were appropriate for hospice. So just wanted to do that note of in either of these, you can then come back onto this service.
No, and I know I would say for myself as a chaplain over the years, one of the most painful things that I've felt as a member of the team is when that's happened, when people are discharged. And for example, like COPD, like it's one of those diseases that can actually appear quite stable and then somebody can crash. And so having those experiences where somebody appeared stable and then they got discharged and then crashed immediately after and we weren't able to reconnect, that's painful and that's hard. So these are things too that are happening at a systemic level that I think we are having to, grapple with in hospice and our advocacy organizations about this, like some of these strict markers and the 6 months and all these things that go into, and how do we extend that support to people who really need it? And then not just that feeling of abandoning people. It's painful and wrong. So it just doesn't, it's everything sort of against what you want to do as a hospice worker. So yeah, thanks for fleshing that out a little bit more, Sonia.
Yeah, and and let that could be, there's some hard news, there's lots of news in here, but there's some really good news in that this is much more flexible than you might fear. And I've talked to a lot of folks who delayed hospice because there might be this new treatment coming down the pike or whatever else. But like you said earlier, Heather, if there is, with a stroke of a pen, you can sign off a hospice and by law, your regular insurance benefit kicks back in and you can go try that treatment, et cetera. So it's way more fluid than you might fear. And that also extends to, you have more say as the patient or family member. Let's just say you don't, this is a real relational thing. So if you just don't click with that team, it can be a little awkward, of course, but you can always say, hey, is there another team within the agency? I'm not really gelling with this, whatever. And that's always okay. I mean, if anyone gives you grief for that, call the manager. I mean, this is, everyone should know in this work that this is a relationship and that's a two-way street and it's got to feel right. So don't be shy about asking to switch teams if it's just not feeling right. And similarly, you can move across hospice agencies. Like in the Bay Area, there are many hospice agencies to choose from. And if one isn't, it's just not feeling right, you can switch over to a different hospice agency without too much trouble. The hospice social worker should help you do that. Okay, Heather, anything else to add to that mix, or shall we move it along? Okay, all right. Well, so the hospice benefit is a Medicare hospice benefit since 1982, right? So it is a Medicare designation benefit. And because most dying people are 65 or older in this country, the Medicare has a sort of, is sort of the boss of the benefit in a way. So even if you are on private insurance, they will often kick you into Medicare to go on to the hospice benefit. That's all seamless. You don't have to worry about it. Whether you have private insurance or Medicare, hospice is a covered benefit in the ways that we're talking about it. There can be, you can be made to feel like there are differences and there may be details in paperwork, but know that all the private insurers generally look to Medicare to set the guidelines for hospice within their world as well. And if this gets confusing, you're probably the best point of contact in the agency would be the social worker.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anything
I would just add the Medicare portion, it's really important in other types of insurance. But I think a healthy and kind of a good community hospice will also be offering care if you're not yet, if you are uninsured, if you are undocumented, if you don't have access to those benefits. I think that's really important to lift up too, that this is meant for everybody. And I think a healthy and responsible hospice will have ways of saying, come on in, we will help you.
There's a pathway for emergency enrollment into hospice, into insurance. And even if you're not a citizen and not documented, an ER social worker is a good person to talk to about this. If you land in an ER, and hospice is actually the right thing, they can help you quickly get insured and into a hospice agency. So thanks for that note too, Heather. It's a big one. Yeah, so this has been in the news of late. And really the last maybe 15 years, our sweet little field, which really had this sort of mom and pop spirit for most of its existence, has, as things go, there are financial opportunities in this work. And so big business and the financial bottom line has crept in, and increasingly loudly. Most of the growth in hospice in the last 15 years or so is on the for-profit side. And I want to be careful. It's not, I certainly don't believe that for-profit is evil and non-for-profit are angels. And it's not that simple. There's some really great for-profit agencies doing beautiful work out there. And there are some really lousy nonprofit agencies out there. So it's not quite as tight as saying money bad, financial bottom line is evil. It's not that clear cut. But it is also true as hospice, as things go with mergers and acquisitions and fewer mom and pop hospice shops, and you're going the way of volume of care as to make the numbers, you can feel it. And the service, the hairs get split, the nickels get split, and it just gets down to the absolute minimum viable product and things like this. So it's a hot mess these days, and there's a need for a lot of us inside and outside the field to be talking and nakedly about, transparently about these issues, about how to conceive of the financial pressures in hospice and what to do about them. Gosh, anything, this is a huge subject. There's probably lots to say, but anything you'd like to add there, Heather, or subtract?
Yeah, I would say I think maybe I'll offer my own personal experience having, I think when I came into hospice 16 years ago, I think I got to kind of come in on the cusp of before this this real boom in the for-profit side of hospice. And so I got to really be what I felt apprenticed in a hospice that was in that still kind of that grassroots model. And there was a deep sense of, even I know we have some amazing death doulas available in our communities now. Then I felt like that was even part of an integrated part of what hospice was offering, was that midwifery model of care, that we were there to accompany you. And I have felt that even in the 16 years that I was a hospice chaplain, that shifted more to how can we kind of move from the accompaniment model to like this education resource model as a way to kind of like, improve productivity and efficiencies and these things that even if you were in a nonprofit model, you were hearing kind of some of that the pressures of the market that were coming in. And so for me, I'm really excited that there are also conversations and resources and communities that are developing outside of hospice that can lift up the need for the accompaniment, that we need people to not just kind of give us pamphlets and, we need the relational aspect of people who can know us and be with us in that journey. And I am concerned. When I read the ProPublica article, among other things, I'm angry about some of those ways in which that's been corrupted. But I still feel at the heart, overwhelmingly, the hospices that are functioning out there are trying to do the best they can to uphold the ideals of hospice. And I think we're probably in a period of real self-reflection and work to advocate for better regulation and accountability.
Amen, sister. We have our work cut out for us here. This work is hospice is too important to mess with. So anyway, yes, we've got a lot of work to do here. And all of us do, to advocate for it and to ask the right questions and push the model rather than be pushed by it. Okay. So sorry. Yeah. So there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, like we said at the start of this. I have met not a small number of well-educated people who really thought that hospice was where you go to be, that someone would actively end your life there, that it was essentially killing people, which is terrifying notion. So to be clear, it is not legal to nowhere to kill you or to hasten your death. So that's one big one. What else have you heard, Heather, in terms of just kind of crazy thoughts out there about hospice?
Yeah, no, I think that one about morphine and some of the big pain medications comes up. I've heard that as, that killed my loved one, that will kill my loved one. It is, I think, one of the biggest, fears that people have is that somehow the care they would offer their loved one would hasten their death. Like that is heavy to live with. And so I hope that is really clear, that everything we're talking about is about supporting the natural dying process and neither trying to prolong life or hasten death, but to sort of really moment by moment support the whole person and their circle of loved ones the best we can.
Yeah. Right on. I think that morphine, oftentimes it's amazing. People really presume, again, smart people, that morphine is sort of code for let's kind of move it along. And at higher doses, it certainly can do that. But well dosed morphine, an opiate, and any opiate will not hasten death.
And I've seen a lot of conversations on hospice teams where I would say there's a real sense of let's do the least amount that is, like, what is the smallest amount that we can give that can be effective. Mm-hmm. So really trying to titrate in ways that are really responsible and thoughtful about, if a person wants to be awake as much as possible, what is the amount of pain that is tolerable to them? So maybe they'll say, I am actually okay living with a certain degree of pain, but how do we stay in conversation about this? Because if it starts to steal from my ability to connect with my loved ones, I might need to actually use more. I've seen that as really it's a conversation, not just we're going to prescribe this and there's nothing else to say. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And it goes both directions. And another reason that needs to be a conversation is, well, untreated pain or inadequately treated pain will also steal your ability to connect with loved ones and can also lead to things like delirium. So it's not like,
Yes.
so sometimes even if clarity of mind and communicability are your goals, morphine may need to be part of that mix. So back to your point, Heather, it's a conversation. You really need to talk that out.
I'm just realizing too, one of the myths I might name is that hospice will always provide a peaceful death. Like as much as I feel like that is our goal, and then we have a lot of tools towards that end, I have been humbled time and again by all the ways that death is a force of nature that even the best systems cannot control. And so, but knowing that a person will not be alone in that they will have support, they will have medication, they will have, spiritual accompaniment, like emotional support for their families, is all true in that for me at least. But it's hard. I think sometimes I've heard pain from family members who've survived, and they saw what looked like a very difficult death for their loved one, and felt like, and it may have been that hospice didn't engage as proactively as they could have, or they were looking at things that were just really complicated and complex, and we have an idea of death that is sort of more rooted in what we see in the movies sometimes around these really just, you kind of fall asleep and you die. There often is a labor that comes with death that I don't know if many of us are prepared for.
Amen. Thank you here yet again, Heather. You're really helping us because these are really important details, because otherwise it's yet another moment we accidentally set each other up for feeling like a failure. We wanted a good death. We did everything right to have a good death, and it still was sad, and Dad was still upset, or it still was messy, or the delirium, whatever. It just, the point here is, yes, let's control what we can, but control, even that word makes me itchy. That this is a big wave. At best, we surf. We don't somehow control the wave. So right, no matter what we do, our best laid plans and the exquisite communication, it's just may need to get messy, and that's okay.
Yes, it's okay.
That is really okay. That is no one's failure. Blah 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 blah. Yeah.
I would really want people to hear that it's not a failure on their part as a caregiver, as a loved one. Sometimes it is just messy.
Yeah. Yes. Just like life.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, is this our last slide, Sons? I think so. And then
Yeah, it is.
Okay, that's wow.
Okay. We knew we were going to go over.
We knew, right? It's
for doing it. Yeah. Thank you.
Big elephant here. Okay. So Heather, you've implied this one way or another throughout, but anything you want to sort of lead us to in here with this sweet slide?
I think there is a part of me that wants to hold space for what I haven't been able to track all of the experiences and feedback that people have been sending in, but I really want to honor the pain and the sorrow and the sense of maybe abandonment or injustice or anything that has come up for you in this conversation, if it feels like we weren't able to speak to that or hold that, because this is emotional, it is hard, and whatever your own experience has been with hospice, I want to really validate that too. That this was not intended in any way to kind of tidy up or put in a box any of those experiences. I am contemplating being a part of this today. I really wanted to feel like that this would be a space that this could be a live and real conversation that can continue to happen in our communities. This is really important emotional, ethical, spiritual work that we are doing. So I'm really grateful to have been part of this conversation. Thank you for everyone who shared.
That's gorgeous, Heather. Thank you. And yes, please. And thank you all for sharing. This is not I mean, it's still relatively easy in general to advocate for hospice because the alternative to hospice very often is even harder. Not always. It depends on your goals and who you are, but and as what's the right word, is sullied as some of the recent events, recent developments around the financials, et cetera, around hospice and the staffing issues, et cetera. And it is very true that a lot of people are having not great hospice experiences. And sometimes that's us teasing out, was it a not great experience because dying is just hard, or did someone actually fail here? Did someone do something that could have been otherwise? So it's so complicated. But the way through is to continue to communicate, share your experiences, good and bad, feedback, let us know. I mean, we all inside and outside this field need to continue. This is a living, breathing thing that we need to keep working on. This is not set in stone and we can forget about it. Hospice has been around a while. It is a wonderful thing in general, but it also needs continuous love and support, just like all of us do. So please keep all the stories moving and flowing, and get them out of your head and into someone else's ear too, please. So, okay, guys. Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. This was so fun being with you. I'm sorry for some of my scatterbrain, but let's get over to questions or comments zones.
Oh, yes. So we've gotten through a few of them throughout the slides, but we've got a couple more that I am hoping to get through here. So this is a huge one, as hospice is not accepting dementia patients. And I'm sure in some places a hospice will work to figure something out. Can palliative care serve those patients?
Short answer is yes. I'm going to stop sharing here, right? Let me just pull us out of the slides. Short answer is yes. I mean, certain palliative care programs will have certain stipulations within that health system. I've heard of, I actually at UCSF, where I worked for a long time, our outpatient palliative care program was only open to folks with cancer. That has since changed. So in the spirit of care, absolutely, the answer is an unqualified yes, that palliative care should serve folks with dementia, absolutely. Practically speaking, in your region, in your health system, in your neighborhood, there may be limitations of what a palliative care program is able to see. And that's usually because of staffing issues. There's just a workforce is not very large in palliative care yet. So yes, as and just about every question in this mix, a slightly qualified yes.
Great. Let's see. This person said, can you comment on palliative sedation and the so-called double effect? I think you guys mentioned, you touched on this a little bit, in which it may quote unquote cause death, even though it's being used to ease suffering.
So yeah, lots to say here. Palliative sedation is a treatment. And basic palliative sedation is a little bit as it sounds, where sometimes we can get to the place of comfort while maintaining your consciousness, your awareness. And sometimes, whether by choice or not, sometimes the answer is sleep. We need to be sedated because the anxiety or the pain is just so bad that we need to be asleep. Or existential concerns, that we are in an existential swirl or a depressed swirl, whatever the source of the suffering. And when it's intractable, it may be time to consider palliative sedation. Palliative sedation, technically, there's a thing called respite sedation, which I don't think I've ever seen invoked, which I'm very curious about. I think it should be tried, which is essentially being chemically put to sleep for a day or two, in a sense, and then lift the sedation and come back out. Because sometimes it's almost like a reset. It's like turning off and on the computer again, or the TV or something. It's sometimes just you need to be brought down for a moment and sleep through, and you might wake up in a slightly different state. And terminal sedation is a branch of palliative sedation that is meant to, we're going to put you to sleep until your body dies. And it is sort of a compromise within the legal frameworks around physician-assisted dying or medically assisted dying. Not all states have laws on the books for medical aid in dying. So your alternative there is this thing called palliative sedation, where we can't hasten your body's death, but we can put you asleep until your body dies. Now, I think the questioner also is getting at, even within that framework, Drew said, but we put you to sleep, and if we don't keep up with hydration, in fact, my bosses in my fellowship wrote a paper called Slow Euthanasia about this. So we kind of convince ourselves that palliative sedation isn't hastening death on one level, but practically speaking, if you're not keeping up with fluids and other things, it might be. The truth is, you just can't kind of know. And the N of one, you can't control for this person with and without sedation, when would they have died? So it's a little murky, but the intention here, and the double effect, is the Thomas Aquinas notion that if your intention here is to relieve suffering, putting someone to sleep, and if that happens to hasten their death, so be it, because our intention was to treat their suffering. And that is the above board ethical framework that allows sort of a passage through this tricky water. Yeah, there's probably a lot more we could say about that, but maybe that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this whole talk could be like 5 hours long. This is a more direct question about just the hospice logistics. How do you know when the right time to enroll is? I'm pretty sure we enrolled too soon, and our experience was a nightmare.
Yeah, Heather, you want to say, you thinking something there?
I'm sorry that was your experience too. I think that, to me, that sounds like, how do we have conversations with ourselves, with our families, with our doctors about where things are. I don't think I have any precise wisdom for what you're describing. It sounds like it is. I think this is murky. And what I am hopeful about is that some of those distinctions between hospice and palliative care, I'm hoping over time might be less black and white, that we can really support people along the way. And so that there won't be such a sharp division between curative care and comfort care. I'm hoping those things can be integrated along the way, but we're not quite there yet. So I don't know if you have more wisdom to share with that, BJ, or your perspective.
I'm with you. I don't know that I have any wisdom here to say, except just to just repeat what you're saying. It's really an aspiration for a lot of us in this field that we know some of the suffering is invented in these sort of structural black and white, overly reduced moments. These transitions in care, like we've been talking, those are all kind of invented problems in a way. And we know this. So our field this is why palliative care in a way has grown up around hospice, to ostensibly be present over time, to be able to move with people over time in various modes of care. We got a long way to go to realize that dream, but that's the idea. That's the idea that's what we're here trying to create. So but no wisdom to share per se, except perhaps in a question to that person. I wonder if it was clear that you could always stop hospice, that if the feeling was we got into this too soon, like we'd said earlier, well, pretty easy with the conversation to revoke hospice and go back to the care that you were receiving before hospice. So I wonder if this person asking knew about that, or if this is still an active process. Maybe it's something to consider.
And I'll just throw in one other thing from my experience with hospice, which was getting it way too late, and it was still wonderful, was I wish we had known about this much sooner and maybe had an informational visit, but just having a conversation around it much sooner would have been great for us, to your point, Heather. But also, I don't remember if we talked about the informational visit. Did we at all?
We didn't. I was just going to harp on that. Thanks, Sons, for bringing that up. Sorry, were you going to say, Sonia? Did I just cut you off?
No, please go ahead. It's just that might be a good hint for also when to know, because you get someone in your home who kind of assesses and can say like, yes, this is appropriate, or no, it's not. And then you can kind of have that moment to make your decision like, okay, they are appropriate for this. I'm not sure if I'm ready, or this person is not appropriate, but at least at that point, you are now in someone's system, so that when it becomes a potential crisis, you've got things set up for you. So just to say it from the other side, that there's also enrolling way too late, which is also really hard.
Yeah, when you just sort of answered the question there too, so just to put a bow on it, you can always request an informational interview or an informational visit. Again, the pandemic has thrown us into weird things, and I've heard folks not being able to get access to that now and again. But if you're just curious about hospice, if you're just planning for your own sake or your family's sake, that you know someday you're going to want to enroll in hospice and you just want to meet the gang and kind of get a little bit clarity about when to call them and stuff, you can just call your local hospice agency or agencies and request an informational interview. So a chance for them to tell you about what they do and you to ask questions, and there should be zero pressure for you to enroll at that moment. So it can be a way to kind of, if you know you want to head that way, kind of start getting in the mix. And yeah, I think the rest sounds.
Yeah, great. Heather, this question is for you. Has your experience with your dad being on hospice and his passing shaped your work when connecting with clients and bereaved family members?
Well, my dad's death, definitely, I think, I don't know how we get through this life without being touched by our own losses and our own deaths. My dad died in the ICU. And so I know for me, that gave me a very different experience and insight. I had seen thousands of people die, but seeing my dad die in the ICU, very different and hard in a different way. And my own grief, right? My own loss. But I remember being actually in the hospital and feeling, I came out of the elevator and I saw somebody crying with like snot coming out. I remember feeling like I was in a community of sorrow. I remember in that moment thinking I'm not alone. Like, even though my dad is in this, his person's in it too. And that's one of the things I have felt a long time about hospice, is that this is community work that we're doing. It may have a lot of areas right now to grow in that are problematic, and it's become maybe commodified in some way, but at its heart, it is people in our communities wanting to journey with you and your loved ones at the end of their lives, because they feel like that's important, and we need that in our community. And so we're not separate from this work. None of us are. So it'll all be our turn at some point to have these kinds of conversations. My dad's death absolutely is with me all the time, but more importantly, his life too. And I remember, for me, if anything, it's helped me to remember that we do, the grief is something that we can live with. I don't think I knew that as well before, if that answers your question.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. This next question is about resources for people who want to get hospice at home, but they may have no family, no friends, no caregivers, and maybe limited funds for help outside of what hospice is providing. Any suggestions for resources for that type of situation?
Well, you should still be able to access hospice. So maybe all the more important, and I think, a lot of us are without friends and without family. And in some sense, within the healthcare system, hospice is the closest thing you can get to sort of getting a new family, with that big team that Heather mentioned earlier, and with the spirit of sort of swarming around you and loving you to the end. So maybe extra important to elect hospice when there's just no one else around to help. And again, that is a covered benefit. There should really not be any out-of-pocket costs for at least the basics of hospice care. And then if you're trying to supplement with more home health aides and other programs, again, talk to the social worker, Meals on Wheels, if there are, who knows what else is available in your community to supplement. And there may be dollars for those programs. Some hospice agencies also keep a pot of money to help support extra needs. So here again, get into hospice and ask them what other services you might qualify for. Doulas is another way, besides home health aides, to add more, to bring more people into the mix and to accompany you. It doesn't necessarily need to be a home health aide. So looking around your community to see who's doing doula work. And that work is often on a sliding scale. Doulas generally set their own rates and things like that. So there may be a conversation of what they can offer for free or next to nothing. So any other thoughts Heather or Sones, on that question?
No, those are great ones.
But you really spoke to my heart too when you're mentioning how sometimes the hospice team can come in and connect in a way with people who don't have that circle of care or a limited amount of support. And I've really gotten to, it was such an honor to have journeyed with people and to feel so deeply a part of their journey. And there is a lot of just deep love and care in that.
Amen.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. This one's going back to the discussion on morphine. Is it possible that morphine used in hospice might be too much for an underweight patient?
It's certainly possible. But that's why we generally use liquid morphine in hospice, so you can really get down to you can really fine tune the amount. And morphine, yes, it's affected by weight and circulating capacity and other things. But if a tiny person has been on opiates for a while, they may need much higher doses than an enormous person who hasn't seen any opiates. So as ever, this is a time to work with the nurse and doctor about getting the right dosage. But you can get down to a practically next to nothing dose with the liquid stuff.
Mm-hmm. The thing that's also been through the chat throughout your whole discussion has been about pain management. It seems like a lot of people have the experience of their person's pain not being managed well. I don't know if that's just more of a comment to leave there, if you have additional feedback on that, but it seems like that is a through line of people feeling that their person is not having their pain managed.
No, I mean, mostly I'm just feel for you guys. That is, it's relative. So generally hospice guys are way better than managing pain than your average medical team. That's for darn sure. And yet it still may not be adequate. Sometimes that's a comment on the nature of the pain, as Heather was pointing us to earlier. Some pain is just will not come to heal, and even with lots of meds, we can very rarely get down to no pain. So some response here may very well be, I'm just so sorry. You may have been working with a hospice that just wasn't on its game. And it may be that the pain was just not surmountable. And this may be a moment to invite sedation into the mix.
BJ, can I offer something to that effect? I've been really interested in what I would call the psycho-spiritual dynamics around terminal agitation. When people do have, at the end of life, they may have just the kind of pain that for whatever reason, like beyond all of our understanding medically, the pain persists. Mm-hmm. And what I have seen and learned, and I think it has to go to, we don't know half of the way that trauma moves in our bodies and what we have yet to learn about that in supporting people at the end of life, what gets flushed out. But I really think that when I have seen, for example, I kind of had a sort of in my head, if a nurse was out with a patient who was having uncontrolled pain and they were throwing everything they could with the doctor's help for like a couple of hours, I would think, what else is happening? Mm-hmm. What else is happening in that person's experience right now that may not actually be touched by medication? And how do we support that and make space for that? So that too, that's a whole other deep conversation. I don't have a lot of answers. I have some stories and that kind of thing, but I do feel like I've had enough to say, oh, what else is happening?
It's such a good point. Yeah. Amen. And these things are not discrete. It's not like your psychic pains over here and your bodily pains. No, it's not that easy. And one last little variable to throw in the mix, as we're really in our final hours and days of life, things are happening in the body that, organs are shutting down, meds aren't moving, the circulation is often compromised. So there are a lot of variables at why perhaps a dose of pain medicine was working a few days ago may no longer be working. And another reason why you really need a sort of a nimble service that can move with you, especially in those final days. So yeah, somewhere in all that, and Heather's comments and mine is something of the answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather, for mentioning that. It's a huge piece of it. Okay, thank you both so much for going over, and thank you everyone who's still in here for hanging out with us. This last question is a great one too. Where's the line between the medical responsibilities of staff and what the families can do? What can that conversation look like between both parties? Or maybe it should be more, what should that conversation look like between both parties?
Heather, you want to start there? Or you want me to jump in?
Yeah, I'm trying to frame in my head the boundaries of that. Like, what is the difference between the roles or the responsibilities?
My guess, this is how I'm reading it, is I think like one thing that surprises people a lot of the time is you are going to be administering drugs. You are going to be doing a lot of things that are considered nursing or medical responsibilities that none of us have any, frame into until this moment. So what is, who is doing what as far as medical responsibilities of staff versus what a family is then going to be doing, like wound care, moving a body, administering medication. So maybe just, what is asked of the family versus where the team is the only person who's going to do it or where they're going to be providing more help.
So I think this is really because this interdigitation is not a clear line. Families on this side, medical team on this side. So therefore, the answer here is communication. Talk to the hospice nurse, whoever is a close person, hospice doc or nurse, someone sort of in the overseeing the care would be a good place to start. But talk to anyone on the team about this and ask for coaching, like help us understand what our responsibilities are here, so we can and can you show us how to give medications, et cetera. You can ask for coaching. That's the way it should work, is just good communication around this, because it is not a clear line. And very often things fall onto family that they did not expect to have to do. Yeah. And very often those very things end up being what they remember best about how they were able to actually participate in their loved one's care in a way that can feel really empowering and beautiful too. But I think the answer here is ask, tell, communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably more than you think you're going to have to.
Yeah, just like the rest of life.
Okay, we made it through all of our questions. We probably could have kept going for another hour or so. Heather, everything you mentioned, I was like, that could be its own discussion. Thank you so much, both of you. And thank you everyone who stayed over. Really appreciate it. We'll get this recording up and it'll be out tomorrow for everyone to review. But thank you again for spending time with us. Happy weekend to everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Heather. We're so lovely.
Huge thanks, Heather.
Thanks, PJ. Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, everybody. This has been great.
All right, guys. Till next time.